This is the ultimate training program for pitchers. If you want to throw harder and give yourself a chance to get to the Division 1 or the professional levels, you have to be on an elite training program. But here's the thing, I'm not going to give you the top 10 drills or exercises that guarantee you to start throwing harder, because that's just not what you need. What you need is to understand the exact things that go into an elite training program and how to actually implement that into your training. And so here are the 5 best things you could do in a training program. And I'll even guarantee that if you do all 5 of these, then you'll start throwing way harder. And I know this works because this is something that I followed when I was going from 78 to 96 miles an hour and eventually hitting 98 miles an hour in my professional baseball career. And my partner, who went from 88 to 100 miles an hour, also followed this. All right, so component number 1 is actually a mega component, and it's comprised of 3 things, and it's something that you do before you actually go out and throw. So I like to start my training programs with mobility. Now, why do I love to do mobility before I go out and throw and work out? Well, it basically opens up my body, right? When we go to throw, we need to access deep ranges of motion. And so if we're able to do some mobility work before we go out and throw, then we'll be able to access deeper ranges of motion. The number 1 thing here is that you don't want to be doing static stretching. See, when you think of mobility, you might be like, oh, I'm just going to do a stretch where I'm holding the stretch and then come out of it. No, there's studies that have actually shown that when you do static stretching, before you go out and do something explosive like throwing or lifting or anything like that, then it actually slows you down. And so what you want to do is keep it dynamic in nature. Okay, instead of doing just a chest stretch where you might be on a door right here and feeling that stretch, you might just do one of these, right? To keep it dynamic. You're training that stretch, contract, right? You want to keep it like that. And a step further than that, for the guys who are a little bit advanced, this is something that I incorporate, is weighted stretching or stretch strength exercises. So what does this actually mean? Well, you're starting to do dynamic stuff, right? But what I like to do is to add weights onto these dynamic stretches. So for example, if you're, just touching your toes, whatever, then you can implement something called the Jefferson curl, where you actually hold weights and then it's pulling you down. And so what do I like to do stuff like this? Firstly, it pulls you into deeper ranges of motion, right? If you have weights, then the weights are inherently going to pull you into you might not have had access to if you're just using your body weight. Firstly, access deeper ranges of motion. Secondly, you need to be strong enough to be able to power out of those positions. So for example, going back to the Jefferson, the weights are going to pull you into deep ranges of motion, and then you have to get out of that position, right? With weights. And so this is just training all the small muscles up the spine, and it teaches strength in deep ranges. With the pitching delivery, it's cool to be able to access deep ranges of motion, like if you're super flexible. But if you're not actually strong and powerful enough to power out of those positions, then it can actually kind of be useless and even detrimental, because it can lead to a reverse effect. Because if you get into deep ranges of motion, but you're really weak, then you're more susceptible to pulling something or injuring something. And that's why I do incorporate mobility and weighted mobility as the first thing in my training program. Some of my favorite exercises, the Jefferson curl, ATG split squat, something like the QL raise lateral, right? Dumbbell pullover for thoracic extension, stuff that you might already be doing, but we're adding weights to it to add a little bit more challenge to it. And again, start slow with the weight. Start really light and then slowly, progressively overload. Okay, so the second component of component number 1 is physical priming. So what does this actually mean? I'll give you like a scenario of like, okay, you need to go out and throw. It might be a velo day, it might be a game, but you just don't really feel that explosive. We've all felt that, right? Where it's like, you kind of feel sluggish, you don't really feel explosive or strong, and you go out and sure enough, you don't throw very hard and it just doesn't feel right. And so this is something that addresses that. Physical priming is basically waking up your physical body and waking up your central nervous system to be able to go out and perform, right? And so my biggest things that I do for this, overcoming ISOs and plyometrics. Firstly, with overcoming ISOs, it might be something like a split squat. When you're pushing it against something that doesn't move, then the brain starts to recruit even more muscle fibers. And it also wakes up the central nervous system because you're doing something at max effort, right? And so the brain is like, oh, we need to wake up and we need to, send as much resources to be able to accomplish that task. There was a great study on this with a group where they tested vertical jumps. One group just did a normal warm up and they did the vertical jumps. And they come back a week later, and then what they do is they actually did overcoming ISOs before they did the vertical jumps. And what they found was that when they did overcoming ISOs, they jumped a lot higher. And why this is because it just wakes up your whole body and you're physically ready to go. One more thing I really like to do with physical priming is, okay, you do an overcoming ISO and you might superset that with like a plyometric. So you're doing overcoming ISO to really wake up the central nervous system, recruiting the muscle fibers, stuff like that. And then you can convert that to speed with something like, okay, you can just do jumps, right? To really feel that explosiveness before you go out and perform. This is something that I incorporate in my training because I'm trying to throw 100 miles an hour. And this has made a huge difference. There's a big difference between the days that I do this and the physical priming and the days that I don't do it. Okay, so the last component of the first mega component is mental priming. This is something that I see so often, is that guys are going out for velo days, they're going out to the games, but they're not really like locked in. There's no intensity to what they're doing. Like it's just like, oh yeah, I have a game, I have a velo day, okay, let's go. 100%. And there's just no intensity there. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, where's the intensity? And what I figured out was that they're not mentally primed to be able to go out and perform at their highest level. And so one of the big things that I do for mental priming is to put yourself into a situation where you have to perform. There's a great story about Eddie Hall. He is the guy who has the world record for the deadlift. He was trying to break the world record, and he went to a scientist and he was like, hey, can you help me break this world record? Like, what do I have to do? And the scientist comes back to him and says, you know what, Eddie, it's actually humanly impossible for you to lift that amount of weight. And he was like, okay. And the scientist was like, but there is one way. And Eddie was like, what is it? And the scientist goes on to tell this story of one day there was a car crash, right? It was a mom and a baby in the back, and there was a big car crash, and the mom came out and she was, unharmed, but her baby is stuck under the car. And so what does the mom do? She tries to save the baby, right? But there's no way she can lift the car, right? But she tries anyway. And somehow she's able to muster all of that strength to be able to lift up the car so that the baby can escape. And so there's this phenomenon where when you're in a situation, when the human body is in a situation of like a do or die situation, then they can perform at a much higher level. And so the scientist basically told Eddie Hall, if you want to lift that weight, you need to lift a car off of your kids. You can't just lift a barbell. This is an extreme example, and I get that. But if we as baseball players can put ourselves in a mental space kind of like that, where it's like, dude, you know what? Like, dude, my career's over if I don't throw this hard. Or like, something really bad's gonna happen if I don't beat my previous record. And we really immerse ourselves in that, then our intensity is just gonna skyrocket, right? Because especially if you're training for velocity, there's no reason for your body to throw hard, right? Because it might just be you, a net, and a radar gun. And there's no adrenaline, and there's no reason for your body to actually throw hard. And so you need to create a reason to throw hard. And the one thing I'll challenge you is this. When you go out and throw, right? It might be a game or it might be a velo day, and you feel like you're lacking intensity because, it's just throwing a ball. Like, there's no reason for your body to throw hard. Really think about it and be like, is it just throwing a ball? Is today just a velo day? Is today just a game day? Or is it one step toward achieving my goals? Is there a greater reason why you're doing these things? When I was playing professional baseball, I was surrounded by all of these guys who were pretty much in life-death situations. They came from the Dominican. If they got released, they didn't know what else they would be able to do. This was their dream, and this was the thing that was going to save their families out of poverty. A lot of my friends in professional baseball were like this. You might be in a blessed situation, whatever, but there has to be a deeper meaning. Why are you doing this? Is it to go out and get a scholarship so that you don't put as much pressure on your parents? Is it to go out and play professional baseball to, take care of your parents and your family? There has to be a deeper meaning. And if there really isn't, then I'm not sure if you go too much further. But that is it for mental priming. Firstly, mobility, really open your body up. Then get your body physically ready to go out and perform. And then lastly, get your mind right to be able to go out and perform at the highest level. All right, so I know that was deep, but let's move on to the next one. So the next component is medicine balls and plyo balls. So why do I love these so much? Firstly, with the medicine balls, there's a couple reasons. The first is that you can actually translate the mobility that you're building here to something that's a little bit more specific to the throw. So for example, if you're working on thoracic extension and your ability to extend your spine, Well, here with the medicine ball, you can do something like a spinal wave throw where you're actually accessing that range and then exploding out of it. I really like this to really translate the mobility that you built, the range that you built, into something that you can use into the throw. Another reason why I love medicine balls is that the arm stress is pretty much none. And so you can just rep out medicine balls. If you're working on something like lower body mechanics and you're really working on something, it might be your back leg, your front leg, something like that, then you can just rep it out, right? Without getting worried that you're gonna get injured or like have your arm be really sore or anything like that, because you're using both hands to throw. And so the stress is gonna be minimal. And so I really love this for patterning reasons. I really love this for accessing deep ranges of motion and then exploding out of it, right? And some of my favorite drills for the medicine ball is, again, the spinal wave throws. And any type of drills that you do with your pliables, it might be a roll-in throw, it might be like a rocker throw where you're rocking back and forth up. Anything that you do with plios, you can do with medicine balls, okay? So that's why I like medicine balls. And then similar thing with pliables. I mean, pliables, this is the number one thing that I love to warm up. And I also love it for recovery days. Why? Because the heavier balls, right, actually put less stress on your arm. Because what places a lot of stress on your arm? It's arm speed. The quicker your arm is going, the more your muscles have to work to be able to decelerate, and the more stress there is going on the arm. And so when you're actually holding a heavier ball and you're throwing it, there's less stress on your arm. And that's why I love it for recovery and just to warm up, because there's less stress in your arm. So you're just throwing it, getting the blood flow going, and that's how you can, get going. The second reason is, again, patterning reasons. So, we've all thrown a baseball our whole lives, right? And so our brain has an idea of how to throw a baseball, and it's all muscle memory at this point. We just throw without really actively thinking about it. It's really hard to make mechanical changes, especially in the upper half when you're holding a baseball, because there's such a strong neural pathway between your brain and how you should throw a baseball. But when you grab a pliable, the texture is different, the weight is different. The brain is like, oh, this is something unfamiliar. And so it's actually easier to make mechanical changes because there's not such a strong neural pathway between, okay, this is how it should go. It's like, no, I mean, this is an unfamiliar thing. We don't have as strong of a neural pathway between the brain and how the throw should go. And so if you're making a change with your arm action or something like that, it's a lot easier to do it with pliables. Not to mention, the different weights can really help. If you grab a heavier ball, then it's gonna pull you into deeper ranges of motion, right? If you grab a lighter ball, then it can teach you how to relax and explode at the last second. And so the different texture and the different weights of the balls all play a part in patterning good mechanics, okay? And lastly, I mean, you can do a bunch of drills with the pliables, like what I just said, the roll-ins. It might be like a seated throw, it could be a 10-toes drill. Anything that you're really working on mechanically, this is where I love to do it, because most of the time you're just throwing against the wall with the pliables or a net, and you don't really have to think about where it's going, right? And so the bigger focus can be internal focus. It can be, okay, this is what I'm trying to feel, which is the complete opposite of what you should be doing when you're pitching and you're going out and throwing, right? When you're going out and throwing with a baseball, you're pitching, you want to be externally focused. Okay, hit right through the mitt, right through the mitt. You don't want to be thinking about, oh, my arm action is right here, my glove is, no. But the pliables give you a chance to be able to do that, to actually create mechanical changes. Because, I mean, there's no other thing to do when you're throwing plios than to work on your mechanics and get warmed up, right? And so those are kind of the reasons why I love pliables so much. And the last reason with pliables, which is something I touched on just a little bit, but with recovery days. The purpose of recovery days is to keep the arm stress as low as possible, right? Like I've talked about before, you want your weeks to look like a W, where you have a high intent day, then you have a low intent day, then you might do a medium, low intent, and then a high intent. This is how you have good amount of rest between each one. And with the pliables, again, with a heavier ball, it puts less stress on your arm, right? Because your arm is traveling much slower. And so for me, on recovery days, I just grab a heavier ball and I just throw it on recovery days to make sure that my arm stress is low. Now, if you throw a bunch of baseballs on your recovery days, then you could easily start to flick it. Oh, I'm feeling good. All of a sudden, your intensity just starts to climb because, I don't know, for whatever reason, you might just feel good that day, or you're just not as disciplined to take it light, right? And so it can actually impede recovery. It can make it so that you are under recovered. And so that's why I love plyo balls, using heavier balls to, use it on recovery days to make sure that this is happening and that I'm not overtraining myself. Okay, now let's move on to the throwing program. So now, you're ready to go. You've done these to pattern mechanics and you feel good. Now we can move on to the actual throwing program. All you need to do with your throwing program is to make sure it accomplishes what you're trying to accomplish. Is it velocity development? Is it command? Is it to get ready for games? There are things that you need to prioritize and really work on and make sure your throwing program is addressing that. So I'll give you an example. If you're trying to build velocity, then you might want to do stuff like high CNS type throwing, where you might start doing pull downs, or you might start doing a little bit higher intense stuff, right? To be able to build velocity. Now, if you want to do command, then you might do something that's 3 times a week I'm doing bullpens, I'm making a competition to see how many strikes I can throw, I'm getting live hitters in there, stuff like that. And so your throwing program is going to really depend on what you're trying to accomplish. And so with the throwing, I'm going to talk about in a velocity development perspective, because that's what we do and that's what we specialize in. Velocity is the number one thing that scouts look for. It's a prerequisite these days. 90 isn't enough. 95 is the new 90. We should all be working on velocity development in our off season, unless you already throw a 95 plus. But if you're watching this, then chances are you do. The biggest thing though with velocity development is that yes, you want to be doing high CNS type throwing, but if you're doing these type of throwing with bad mechanics that are placing a crazy amount of stress on your arm, then it can become very, very dangerous, right? And if you're someone who has really terrible mechanics and each time you throw you feel sore in your elbow, then I wouldn't really recommend this. You need to start at the foundation. You need to build really, really solid mechanics to be able to go out and throw hard, right? And if you want help with that, top link in the description, that's all we do. We have guys who have worked at the MLB level, help guys to make sure that mechanics become way more efficient. But if you're a guy who, has pretty solid mechanics and what you need to start doing is actually pushing intent, then with the throwing program, you might do something like a pull down day. This is something that I did very consistently when I was going from 78 to 96 miles an hour. This is basically when you sprint toward a target, turn and throw it as hard as you can. The cliche saying is, to throw hard, you need to throw hard, right? If you're just constantly throwing at a low velocity, then there's no reason for your body to adapt and start to throw hard, right? To build adaptations to allow yourself to produce enough force to throw. And so we do need to incorporate some of these. The high CNS type throwing is also really good to mold high velocity mechanics, okay? And so it might be like a pull down, for example. It's really good to develop the lead leg block, right? To develop a really strong lead leg to be able to block all of that energy that you're sending, and you're blocking it, and now it's coming up to the upper body, which is similar to the mound, right? Where you're here, you're going down, and you have to block with your front leg to send all of that energy up the chain, okay? And so, with high CNS type throwing at the Pitch Lab, we do incorporate these, and we do a lot of it to actually induce mechanical changes. We put guys into a position where there's no choice but to actually adapt and create that mechanical change. And so that's kind of how we incorporate it. It might be something like a turn and burn, where we are forcing the hips to go first before the upper body. It might be something like a roll and throw. This is something that I've personally done, which is throwing max effort to force yourself to feel that separation and the spinal extension right here, and then pull down on it, okay? And so this is just another way of really working on really good patterns, right? This stuff can really help, but when you can actually start to implement them in the high CNS type throwing, and that's when you can see really, really good transitions from what you're actually working on mechanically into high CNS throwing and onto the mound, right? Because you're able to do these things at higher intent, which means that you'll probably be able to do it on the mound as well. All right, so component number 4 is lifting. And this is very, very similar to the throwing, to where it has to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish and what your lowest hanging fruit is, okay? So for example, for me, when I was 16, I could barely squat 135 pounds, right? And so what do you think was like my biggest priority? Was it to get really quick? and powerful? No, I just had to get really strong and get bigger, right? Because without strength, I mean, you don't have that force production to be able to throw hard. I've explained this in a previous video, but you need to be able to build a solid foundation of strength before you're able to tap into it in the pitching delivery. And the most elite athletes can only tap into 80-90% of their strength and force production potential. And so if we can build this up as wide as we can, then we can tap into more of that on the pitching mound. And so for me, when I was 16, it was strength. I had to get big, I had to get strong. That's all I was kind of focused on because, again, the strength is the foundation. Now, when I started getting a little bit stronger, I'm 17, 18, I can squat 350 plus, I can deadlift a pretty good amount. Now the focus shifts to, okay, let's work on power. Let's work on being able to move the bar quick and moving quick instead of just moving as much weight as possible. Because in baseball, there is a strength base where when you're strong enough, then increasing strength above that point doesn't really lead to too many great results. Once you hit this strength base, when you're strong enough to throw at a high level, now you need to shift that onto different things like power, impulse, speed, all of that stuff. And so that's kind of what I did when I was 17. I started to transition over to, okay, let's develop power, speed, impulse, instead of just, okay, let's try to get to a 500-pound squat. As I started to do that, I kept developing adaptations and my priority changed from, okay, I need to get strong to, okay, I need to start being able to move my body quick and powerful. And so again, just like the throwing, it has to accomplish what you need to accomplish. And the biggest thing with this is identifying it, right? And dropping your ego, because I see too many guys trying out advanced lifting stuff, like, overcoming ISOs, VBT training, when they can't even squat like over 225 pounds. Like, bro, you need to work on your force production potential. Like, you're just not even strong enough to get any of those results from the advanced training methods because you're just weak. Like, just by getting stronger and bigger, you would probably get way more results than doing all of the fancy stuff that you're doing. I absolutely hate these like baseball specific workouts when the guy is like weak. Yeah, we can get fancy with it, advanced with it when a guy's more of an advanced athlete. But if you're a guy who hasn't even been lifting for like 5+ years consistently, it's like, dude, just stick to the basics, get strong, big, get to a point where you have a decent strength base, and then let's get a little bit more fancy with it. And so that's kind of like the progression that you want to follow. Also with the lifting, it can go in phases, right? So for example, me, I want to be peaking, next year, December, maybe January, February type stuff. And so I have 6 months to be able to get ready. And so it goes in phases of where you might be in more of a foundation building phase for 2 months, and then you go into more of a transition phase where you're working on more power, and then you could do more of a peaking phase where you're working on speed and getting the most out of your body, okay? And so that can also happen in a lot of these good programs where they'll actually phase it out, right? To when you have to get ready so that it prepares your body to be ready when you need it the most, okay? But closer to when I'm, going out and throwing and I need to be throwing, upper 90s to 100, that's when a lot of my lifting is gonna change to more peaking stuff, like really speed work, getting as much out of that foundation that I can, okay? And so those are the two things with lifting. Make sure it's accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish, and also phase it out so that you have the goal in mind when you have to get ready, and then phase it out so that it'll put you in the best position to be able to perform at that time. All right, so component number 5 is also a mega component where it's comprised of 2 things. Firstly, with recovery. I get this question all the time about what arm care routine is best for recovery so that my arm doesn't get sore. And my answer to a lot of that is that recovery is mainly based on the boring things. And I know this isn't something that you want to hear, but firstly, if your sleep isn't good, then you don't need an arm care routine to recover. You need to sleep well, right? Because sleep is one of the biggest things that you can do to actually recover. Secondly, hydration. You need to be hydrated. Nutrition. You do need to be locked in on nutrition. And also, one thing that people miss is take your recovery days seriously. If you're not taking your recovery days seriously, they have to be really light, like really light, 30%, 40%, maybe 50%. But when you start to increase that and you start to, just throw hard just because you want to throw hard on a recovery day, that's when you start to under recover. Because now instead of going high intent here and then now you're recovering, well, you're going high intent and then you're going high intent again, okay? And then the next day you might do like a medium day, you're right here. And then next day you do high intent and then maybe like a high intent again. Like, look at all of this workload. Like, you're giving your body no time to rest and recover. Versus if you're high intent, okay, rest. Medium intent, rest. High intent, okay? And so those are kind of like the big things for recovery. Also with recovery, it's just being able to build a strong, durable body, right? If you're just with like the lifting stuff, a lot of arm care can be done in the lifting portion. You know, the bands and all of that stuff is good for blood flow. I would do them after you throw if it's something that makes you feel good, but to really induce adaptations that are going to help you recover better, help build a more resilient, durable, and body, then you got to do it in the weight room. You know, like actually building out the strength in the back of the shoulder, in the rotator cuff, even in the serratus and how well your scaps move. All of these things, they're going to be accomplished in the gym. They're not going to be accomplished as a post-throw arm care routine, okay? And so that's the biggest thing with recovery. And in terms of nutrition, all right, this needs to be tailored to you. Are you someone who is a skinny hard gainer who has to gain a lot of weight to be able to get big and put on muscle? Well, then you have to be in a caloric surplus, right? You need to eat more than you burn. And the simplest way to do this is just to measure your weight every single day. If you're gaining a little bit of weight every single day, then you're eating enough. If you're not, then you're just not eating enough. It's literally as simple as that. Tips on how to actually increase calories is, you know, high calorie shakes, peanut butter sandwiches. A lot of this stuff just add calories into your diet so that it's way easier for you to gain weight. And vice versa, if you're someone who has to slim down, lose some weight, you just need to be in a caloric deficit. And so you need to eat less than you burn. And again, the same thing applies. You can just look at the scale to see if it's going up or down and adjust it off of that. Okay, and so these are the 5 things that I will include in an elite training program. And if you're missing some of these, then you're not getting as much as you can out of the training program. If you're doing a training program without any of these, then it's not a complete training program. And so if this is something that you want help with building it out, this is exactly what we do at the Pitcher Lab, where we put you through a full assessment, create the best plan that we can for you. It's custom to each athlete. And then we put you up with a mechanical specialist who has worked at the MLB level. They're gonna come in, work with your mechanics just to make sure that this is all in set. You're not doing high CNS throwing without having decent mechanics and putting yourself in a risk of injury. So they're gonna work with you. And as a bonus, we do group calls, classrooms, where we get on Zoom meetings to make sure that you're actually getting the knowledge required, right? It's good to have like a plan of all of this stuff, right? But to actually know why you're doing this stuff behind it, the underlying reasons why you're doing this stuff, that can make a huge difference. And so you're gonna get a complete plan on exactly what you have to do every single day. You're gonna get coaching, right, from one of the industry's best, right, including myself. And we do Zoom calls 2 to 3 times a week to make sure that you have all of the things you need to succeed. So if this is something that you're interested in, top link in the description, you can book a call with me. We book about 5 to 10 calls a day. So if there is availability, then would love to talk to you. But if not, then you might have to wait. I'll see you next time.